The first time I met Marjorie Weller, she looked at me like I'd shown up to her dinner table dragging dirt across an heirloom rug. It's not that she said anything outright, no, she was too clever for that. Her smile was just a little too tight, her compliments delivered like carefully sharpened darts. "Oh, I see you work from home," she'd said, her eyes skimming my outfit like it offended her. "That must be convenient." Nathan, sweet and blind, just nodded proudly and squeezed my hand, completely missing the chill that had settled between his mother and me like an unwelcome draft. That was 3 years ago. Since then, not much had changed, except now we were married, and the scrutiny had intensified. I tried, really tried, to make it work. I brought Marjorie flowers she didn't water, complimented her on casseroles that tasted like cardboard, smiled through endless lectures on family traditions and the Weller way of doing things. Isabel, Nathan's younger sister, wasn't much better. She had the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to manipulate with a tilt of the head and a half smile. Around Nathan, she was affectionate and bubbly. With me, she was cool politeness wrapped in silk. And still, Nathan believed they liked me. He thought every lukewarm invitation to brunch, every obligatory Christmas gift, was a sign of growing affection. "You're winning them over," he told me one evening as we curled up on the couch, his arm draped over my shoulder, his voice thick with hope. "They just need time." Time, I wanted to say, had already passed. 3 years of holidays, family dinners, carefully worded group chats, and strained smiles. 3 years of being measured and always found lacking. But I didn't say that. I just nodded and leaned into him, wishing I could share his delusion. It wasn't all bad, of course. Nathan was my light. We'd met at a design conference in Seattle, both of us young and eager and caught in the same rainstorm after leaving a panel on creative freelancing. He held his umbrella over me without asking, and we walked half a mile under it together. I liked him instantly. His kindness wasn't performative, it was just part of him. He listened when I talked, remembered small details, sent me articles about UX design just because he thought I'd enjoy them. When he proposed 2 years later under that same umbrella, I said yes before he finished the question. He was the reason I stayed quiet about his family. I didn't want to taint his view of them, didn't want to be the wedge that split something apart. But silence had a cost. Every time Marjorie gave me a look that made my skin crawl or Isabel made a snide comment disguised as humor, something small in me curled tighter, like paper catching flame. And Nathan, so eager to believe in peace, never noticed the smoke. The worst part was the loneliness. My parents had passed away when I was in college, and I didn't have siblings. The idea of being part of a big family had once thrilled me, laughter echoing around full tables, shared stories, holiday chaos. I'd thought marrying Nathan would bring me into something warm and close-knit. Instead, I felt like a foreign object jammed into a place I didn't belong, tolerated but never accepted. Edenport was a small, coastal town where everyone knew everyone, and the Wellers were practically royalty here. Nathan worked at a boutique financial firm, and I had a modest but steady career designing websites for local businesses and a few national clients I'd picked up through referrals. It should have been idyllic. But every time we passed Marjorie's grand stone house on Ashbury Lane or ran into Isabel at the farmer's market, my stomach tightened. I smiled, always, but it never felt real. Sometimes I wondered if they thought I wasn't good enough for him, like I was an imposter who'd snuck into their world and stolen something precious. Or maybe they just didn't like losing control. Nathan had been the golden boy, their star, and now he was building a life with someone who didn't care for their social calendar or their pedigree. I came from humble roots, and I liked my independence. I didn't ask for favors. Maybe that made me a threat in ways I didn't understand. Still, I tried. God, I tried. I hosted them for dinner, even when I knew they'd critique the seasoning. I went to Isabel's gallery openings and clapped politely while she soaked up praise. I helped Marjorie with her church fundraiser, even though I felt like a prop. Every time Nathan said, "They're coming around," I let myself believe him for a minute. But there was always a flicker of doubt, a thread of unease that never let me settle. Something beneath their smiles didn't match their eyes. And though I couldn't quite name it, I felt it growing stronger, like a tide rolling in quietly, gathering force before the crash. I didn't know then just how right that instinct would turn out to be. I didn't expect anything from Marjorie for my birthday. I'd told Nathan not to make a fuss, just dinner at home and maybe a slice of cake if we were feeling festive. I'd had enough forced celebrations growing up, where the energy was more about obligation than joy, and over the years, I'd learned to appreciate the quiet kind. But the package arrived that morning, right on our doorstep, pristine white with a velvet ribbon tied into a bow so perfect it almost didn't look real. I stared at it, unsure whether to bring it inside or leave it there like something too beautiful and too suspicious to touch. Nathan was the one who picked it up, holding it like it might crack open and reveal a prize inside. From Maison Delacroix, he said, eyebrows raised. That's high-end. My mom must have really pulled some strings. He sounded genuinely touched, like this meant something. I took the package from him slowly. The label was handwritten in delicate script. Happy birthday, Lena. From Marjorie. Just Marjorie. Not Marjorie and Isabel. Not from the Weller family. Just her. The air felt a little colder in the kitchen, though the window was shut tight. I didn't even know she knew about this place, I said. Maison Delacroix only ships to select clients. Nathan grinned. Maybe she's one of them. Or she asked Isabel to order it for her. Either way, this is a big deal. I didn't want to say what I was thinking, so I gave a small nod and peeled back the ribbon. Inside, nestled in golden paper, was a sleek black box with the chocolatier's embossed crest on the lid. I opened it and stared at rows of delicate artisan chocolates, each one a tiny work of art. Marbled swirls. Gold leaf. Dusted lavender. The smell was rich and almost intoxicating. I touched one with the tip of my finger, then pulled my hand back. Nathan laughed. You're looking at it like it's going to bite. I'm just surprised, I said carefully. This doesn't feel like her. She's trying, he insisted. This is her way of reaching out. You always say you like the subtle things. I did. But this didn't feel subtle. It felt calculated. I'd spent enough time trying to decipher Marjorie's motives to know when something was off. She never gave gifts without meaning, and when she did, they always came wrapped in strings. Last year, she gave me a book on graceful homemaking with a note that read, "A little guidance never hurts." The year before that, a self-help guide titled "When Silence is Best." This, however, was a new approach, opulent, sweet, and wrapped in charm. I'll have some later, I said, shutting the lid and placing the box on the counter. Nathan tilted his head. You sure? They look amazing. Yeah. I just don't want to ruin my appetite. He didn't argue. That night, after our quiet dinner, grilled salmon, his favorite, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and scrolled through client emails while Nathan disappeared into the kitchen. I didn't think much of it at first, just the occasional clink of china and the soft rustle of wrappers. When I finally glanced up, I saw him walking back in with the now empty box in his hands. You ate all of them? I asked, half laughing. He wiped a smear of chocolate from the corner of his mouth like a kid caught with frosting on his fingers. They were incredible. Seriously. I kept telling myself I'd stop after just one more, and then I reached for the box, staring down at the empty liners and scattered gold foil. My unease twisted a little deeper. You didn't even save one? I thought you didn't want any, he said, sheepish. Besides, I figured it was a gift for both of us. It wasn't. That box had been addressed to me. My name. Not ours. Not his. Mine. And for a moment, I just stared at the box and felt off. I told myself I was being paranoid, letting my history with Marjorie get the best of me. Maybe this really was her attempt at being generous. Maybe Nathan was right. But as I lay in bed later, watching him sleep with a hand on his stomach and his breathing a little uneven, something gnawed at me. The box hadn't come with a card or a message beyond the label. No list of ingredients, no branding inside the lid, odd for a place like Maison Delacroix. It was almost too perfect. Like it was meant to make a statement. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up in fragments, first to the sound of Nathan shifting in bed, then to a low groan, and finally to him stumbling toward the bathroom with a hand pressed to his mouth. The retching started soon after, violent and relentless, echoing through the tiles. I jumped out of bed and rushed to him, heart pounding. His skin was clammy, his breath shallow, and I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that something was very wrong. My gaze flicked briefly toward the box still sitting on the counter, its pristine exterior now mocking. And just like that, the gift no longer felt generous. It felt like a warning. By sunrise, Nathan could barely sit up. He was pale, drenched in sweat, and shaking so hard I had to hold a towel to his back just to keep him steady while he dry-heaved into the sink. Whatever had taken hold of him was vicious, fast, unforgiving. I'd never seen him like that. Not even during the worst of his college flu days. This was different. This was something else. "Nathan," I said softly, crouching beside him as he leaned against the bathroom cabinet, "we need to go to the hospital." He shook his head weakly, eyes glazed. "Just bad food. I'll be okay." But he wasn't. 30 minutes later, he could barely speak. I didn't hesitate after that. I threw on jeans, grabbed his wallet and keys, and half-carried him to the car. My hands were trembling as I drove us across town to St. Haven Medical Center, my foot heavy on the gas, heart banging in my chest like a drumline. The sky was still streaked with that gray pre-morning haze, and the roads were nearly empty. I whispered, "Hold on," over and over as if repetition alone could keep him tethered. At the ER, the moment the nurse saw Nathan collapse into the wheelchair, they rushed him back. I answered every question they threw at me. No known allergies, healthy overall, no medications, until they asked if he'd eaten anything unusual in the last 24 hours. My voice caught in my throat. Chocolates. A full box of chocolates, gifted to me by his mother. That made the nurse pause. "From where?" she asked. "Maison Delacroix." But I hesitated, suddenly unsure. It didn't seem normal. It didn't have the usual packaging. She wrote something down quickly before ushering me toward the waiting area. I sat there with my legs crossed tight, bouncing my foot up and down. The hours stretched. Nurses came and went. I texted Rachel, my friend from college who'd become a lawyer and always told me to trust my gut. No reply yet. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grim, professional. "Mrs. Weller?" "Yes, that's me. Your husband is stable, but we're concerned. He's showing symptoms of acute poisoning. Not food poisoning. Something more serious. We're starting toxicology now." My chest seized. "Poisoning?" He nodded. "We're not jumping to conclusions yet, but we've ruled out common bacterial infections. His vitals dipped dangerously low earlier, and if you hadn't brought him in when you did, well, let's just say you made the right call." I sank into the chair again, fingers clutching the armrest. I felt sick. Then the worst possible thing happened. Marjorie and Isabel walked into the waiting room. I stood slowly, tension climbing up the back of my neck like a wave about to break. "My baby," Marjorie gasped, walking toward me. "We came as soon as we heard." "How did you even?" I started, but then caught myself. Isabel was texting someone when I left the apartment. "Of course." Isabel barely looked at me. Her face was pale, too pale, her lips pressed into a line. "Is he all right?" "Barely," I said, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. "He's been poisoned." Marjorie's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, dear God." I stared at both of them, trying to read what was behind their reactions. Were they genuinely shocked? Or was that panic? It felt like panic. "Did you eat anything strange?" Isabel asked, too quickly. "He didn't," I replied. "He ate the entire box of chocolates your mother sent. That's it." Both women stiffened, just for a second, but I saw it. I saw the flicker in Isabel's eyes before she masked it. Marjorie glanced at her daughter briefly, and it was in that moment that my world tipped. My gut had been screaming for years, and now it was howling. "I'm going to let the doctors know," I said slowly, "about the chocolates. They're running toxicology now." "You should," Isabel said, her voice tight. "But they were from a trusted company, weren't they?" I tilted my head, suddenly cold. "Were they?" "I never opened them." "Nathan did." I thought you had some too, Marjorie said quickly. No, I replied. He ate them all. The silence that followed was deafening. A nurse walked past, glanced our way, and I stepped away from the Wellers to follow her. I couldn't be near them. My brain was spiraling with questions. Had this been an accident? Was something in the box mislabeled, or no? That wasn't it. The way Isabel had gone still. The tightness in Marjorie's tone. That wasn't fear for Nathan. That was fear of discovery. Later, after they left, I stood in the hospital hallway staring out at the parking lot. The sky had cleared, and the sun was rising like nothing had happened. But everything had. Nathan was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs, and the two women who claimed to love him had looked stricken, but not with concern. With guilt. And in that moment, I knew. I couldn't pretend anymore. Something was terribly, deliberately wrong. The word poison echoed through my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I sat beside Nathan's hospital bed, gripping his hand while machines beeped around us in a sterile rhythm. He was conscious now, but barely. His eyelids fluttered, and his skin still looked waxy and drawn. I wanted to scream, to rip the tubes out and pull him back into our life, but all I could do was sit there and hold on, hoping the truth would reveal itself fast enough to matter. Dr. Chowdhury came in again, clipboard in hand. Toxicology is still running, but preliminary results suggest organophosphates, something synthetic. We're not dealing with a naturally occurring foodborne contaminant. My mouth was dry. What does that mean exactly? It means this wasn't accidental, she said gently. There was likely something foreign added to what he consumed. I nodded slowly, my stomach twisting. I already knew it in my bones, but hearing it spoken aloud gave it shape. Wait. I glanced at the door, half expecting to see Marjorie or Isabel standing there, perfectly composed with faux concern stretched across their faces. But they were gone. They hadn't returned after that first visit. They'd left in a hurry after asking about the chocolates again. I kept replaying it in my head, how Isabel had asked if I'd eaten any. That wasn't concern for Nathan. That was panic that the wrong person had eaten something meant for someone else. I tried to remember everything that had ever felt off in my time with them. The afternoon tea that made me nauseous for days. The Christmas cookies that had a strange bitter aftertaste. The spiced cider at Thanksgiving that left me dizzy after just one cup. At the time, I chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, bad luck. But now I saw it differently. A pattern. Subtle. Slow. Methodical. I texted Rachel, finally getting a response. That's not normal. Keep everything. Get it documented. If anything else comes up, call me. I stood and stepped into the hallway, suddenly desperate to find that chocolate box. If it had been sent, it had to be somewhere. Maybe the hospital staff had it? Or it was still at the apartment. I called Isabel. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight. Lena? I need the chocolate box, I said, skipping any pretense. Where is it? I threw it away, she said. I came by your place this morning after you left and saw it on the counter. It was empty. I figured it was trash. You what? My voice dropped an octave, low and sharp. Why would you come by? Without asking. I just wanted to check on the apartment, she said quickly. And I thought it might be dangerous to leave it there, just in case. That's convenient. She went silent, and for a second, I thought she'd hung up. I'm calling Detective Landry, I said. They'll want to know that you disposed of potential evidence. You think I had something to do with this? She snapped. That's absurd. I hung up without answering. When Detective Landry arrived at the hospital that afternoon, he was quiet, calm, but I could tell something had already piqued his interest. He had that tight, controlled posture of someone who knew he was walking into something far deeper than it looked on the surface. I told him everything about the chocolates, the lack of branding, Isabel's sudden disposal of the box, the years of suspicious illnesses. He scribbled notes, nodding. We'll be checking security footage from your apartment building. I'll also request access to phone records and credit card statements for both women. In the meantime, if anything shows up, anything else that feels off, call me immediately. Later that evening, Landry returned. You're not going to believe this, he said, gesturing for me to follow him into the hallway. We found the box. My breath caught. What? Isabel said she threw it away. She did throw it away, he said with a grim smile. Into the trunk of her own car. He held up a photo. There it was, the pristine Maison Delacroix box tucked beside an old blanket and a plastic container. The box still intact. Why would she lie about that? Because people don't hide what they're proud of, he said simply. We're sending it to the lab. It was like a trapdoor opened beneath my feet. That was the moment everything started sliding into place. Isabel hadn't panicked over Nathan's illness. She'd panicked over the possibility of the wrong person finding the evidence. She never meant to protect us. She meant to protect herself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed beside Nathan, who was improving slightly now that they'd flushed most of the toxin from his system. He looked peaceful under the hospital lights, so unlike the chaos swirling in my mind. I sat in that chair thinking of all the times I'd doubted myself. All the moments I swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. And all the signs I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe anyone could be that cruel. But now, I couldn't afford denial. This wasn't about fitting into the Weller family anymore. This was about survival. I stared at the photograph of the chocolate box, still stunned by the sheer arrogance of it. It wasn't just that Isabel had lied, it was how confidently she'd done it, like she truly believed no one would dare question her. Hiding the box in her trunk? She hadn't even tried to make it look like a mistake. It was carelessness laced with entitlement, and now that the mask was slipping, I could see it clearly. This wasn't a one-time lapse. This was a pattern. Detective Landry's voice broke through my thoughts. The lab's rushing the results. We should know by tomorrow if there are traces of anything toxic inside. I nodded, barely hearing him. I was still picturing Isabel's face when I'd asked about the box. The tightness in her voice. The way her eyes shifted, not quite meeting mine. How many times had I brushed off that unease? How often had I written off her coldness as awkwardness or resentment she'd eventually outgrow? Nathan was sleeping more peacefully now, the color returning slowly to his face. Seeing him like this, vulnerable, caught in the crosshairs of something so sinister, lit a fire in me I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just the woman they didn't like. I was the obstacle they wanted gone. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't imagining things. They hadn't just disliked me. They'd hated me. Enough to hurt him by mistake. The next morning, Landry called. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tension woven into every word. There were traces of arsenic in the chocolate. We're not talking trace amounts either, enough to do real damage if eaten in bulk. Which, unfortunately, your husband did. I swallowed hard. So it's confirmed. It's confirmed. He didn't say the word murder, but it hovered between us, unspoken and chilling. Attempted. Planned. Executed. The only thing that had gone wrong for them was the target. We've detained both women for questioning, Landry continued. They're not under arrest yet, but we've got enough to hold them. I exhaled, not quite relief, but something close. My hands were shaking again, so I folded them into my lap. What do you think their motive was? Still digging, he said. But these things are rarely random. There's usually money involved, or resentment. Resentment. That word felt heavy in my chest. I'd felt it simmering beneath every interaction with Marjorie and Isabel for years. The way Marjorie corrected me when I spoke. The way Isabel would exclude me from conversations with Nathan. They never said it out loud, but I knew. They didn't want me in the family. And now, it seemed, they were willing to go further than I ever imagined to fix that. Rachel came over that evening. She brought me coffee, a firm hug, and the sharp mind I needed right then. We need to think bigger, she said, spreading her notes out on my kitchen table. This wasn't spontaneous. Arsenic? That takes planning. They either had access or someone else helped them. I don't think there's anyone else, I murmured. They're careful about keeping things in the family. Always have been. Then we start looking into history, she said, flipping her notebook. Any strange illnesses? Accidents? Life insurance changes? Financial moves that don't make sense. Something in my mind clicked. Nathan updated his life insurance policy last month. We'd talked about it because of the new condo application, and he said it would list me as the sole beneficiary. But Marjorie made a weird comment about knowing he'd take care of her if anything ever happened. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Get the documents. Now. It took some digging, but I found the email chain. Nathan had CC'd me on the confirmation. The initial beneficiary was me, but the policy had a contingent, Marjorie Weller. And it wasn't small. If I was out of the picture, she would inherit everything. Rachel leaned back, whistling low. That's a motive, Lena. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. I could feel the blood drain from my face. And they thought I'd eat the chocolates. Rachel nodded. But Nathan got to them first. I stood and paced, nausea rolling in again. This is so much bigger than I thought. And I guarantee it's not the first time they've tried something like this, Rachel added. We need to look into their past. Medical records, previous partners, extended family. Anyone else who's been sick around them. It all felt like it was unraveling too fast, like I'd opened a door and discovered the floor beneath me was rotting. What if Nathan hadn't eaten the chocolates? What if I had? And worse, what if I had, and no one ever connected the dots? I walked back into Nathan's hospital room and stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of his chest. He looked fragile, and I hated that. Hated that they'd made him vulnerable to their hatred by extension of loving me. I kissed his forehead and whispered, I promise I won't let them win. Because now it wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming every moment they tried to make me feel small. Every day I swallowed my voice to keep the peace. They had underestimated me. And they had no idea what I was about to uncover next. I always thought intuition was just anxiety dressed up in a nicer coat. But now, it was more like a flashlight, illuminating pieces of the past I'd long since pushed to the corners of my mind. Once Rachel and I started digging, it was like cracking open a sealed vault, the kind you instinctively know not to touch, because what's behind it might be worse than your darkest suspicions. But we opened it anyway. Nathan had finally stabilized enough to be discharged from the hospital with strict instructions for rest and follow-up. He didn't say much on the ride home, his eyes hollowed from pain and betrayal. When I told him what the toxicology reports found and what Detective Landry uncovered about the chocolate box, he went quiet. Not angry, not shocked, just quiet. The kind of silence that hangs between people when they realize a truth too heavy to say aloud. He sat on the couch, sipping water slowly, while Rachel and I combed through old family paperwork he kept in the desk drawer. Insurance policies, birth certificates, receipts. And then, Rachel's fingers froze on a worn folder labeled simply Weller Family. Lena, she said slowly, this is strange. Inside were copies of not one, not two, but 4 insurance policies. 2 belonged to Nathan's late father, Charles Weller, and the other 2 were for Marjorie's parents. All deceased. All deaths ruled as illness or accident. And every single one had Marjorie listed as either the primary or contingent beneficiary. This one, Rachel said, tapping the page, was updated just 3 months before Charles Weller's fatal heart attack. I swallowed hard. That's a coincidence. Rachel's look was sharp. No, it's a pattern. And it fits. I remember the funeral, Nathan said quietly from the couch. Dad had been in good shape. He'd just started running again. Marjorie kept saying it was stress, that he never took care of himself, but it never added up. She cremated him before they could do a full autopsy. I turned to him. You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered, he said. At the time, I didn't question her. She was grieving, or so I thought. Rachel sat back, exhaling. We need to dig further. If she's done this before, there has to be a trail. For hours, we tracked whatever digital footprints we could find. We searched obituaries, cross-referenced death records, and combed through Marjorie's social media posts, looking for patterns in the dates. What emerged chilled me. Every major loss in Marjorie's life was preceded by some kind of financial gain. After her father's sudden stroke, she posted about a new kitchen renovation just weeks later. After her mother's death, she paid off her mortgage early. And after Charles died, she downsized, into a luxury condo in the center of Edenport with a state-of-the-art security system and concierge service. Why would she have another insurance policy in my name? I asked, suddenly remembering the chilling discovery I hadn't yet dared to confirm. Can someone take one out without my consent? Rachel pursed her lips. Not legally. But if she forged documents or posed as you, it's possible. Especially if she had access to your personal information. I ran to the file cabinet in the office and yanked open the bottom drawer. In an old folder marked Taxes, I found something that didn't belong, a printed policy I had never seen before. My name was there, bold as day, under Primary Insured. The policy amount? $500,000. And the beneficiaries? Marjorie Weller and Isabel. My hands trembled as I handed it to Rachel. She forged this. Rachel's expression darkened. We're going to the police. Today. We brought everything to Detective Landry, policies, dates, signatures, our research, and the printed file. He didn't even blink. He simply nodded, as if all of this confirmed something he already knew. This isn't just about Nathan, he said. This is a web. Your evidence is painting a much bigger picture, Lena. And I think you were always the target. The words settled in my chest like stone. I thought of the chocolates again, how I'd hesitated, how Nathan had eaten them first. If I'd taken just one, I might have been the one in the ICU. Or worse. She's not impulsive, I said aloud. She's calculated. She plants seeds. Waits. Makes it look like misfortune. Illness. Grief. Landry nodded. And people like that always leave traces. We just have to keep pulling the thread. When we left the station, Rachel slipped her arm through mine. You were right to be cautious all this time, she said softly. And you're not alone in this. I smiled faintly, but it didn't reach my eyes. Because now I knew I'd never been paranoid. I'd been hunted. And Marjorie, along with Isabel, had nearly succeeded. But they hadn't. And now I was holding the map that led to every secret they'd tried so hard to bury. Nathan sat beside me in the passenger seat, his hands clenched into restless fists on his lap. He hadn't said much since we left the station, but I could feel his energy shifting. Anger, disbelief, maybe even shame. I didn't push him to talk. There were things you couldn't put into words right away, like realizing the people who raised you might have been playing a long, cruel game, and you were the pawn moved into place. I drove us toward Marjorie's house, my knuckles white on the wheel. The place stood like a fortress at the edge of town, a two-story colonial with those picture-perfect shutters and flower boxes that screamed family legacy. But I wasn't here to admire landscaping. I was here for answers. And Nathan finally was too. We'll just look around, I said, glancing at him. We don't take anything. But if we find something, we tell Landry, he finished. I know. He still looked dazed. The man who once defended his mother with blind loyalty was unraveling that loyalty thread by thread. I hated that it had to come to this, but we were past hoping for apologies or explanations. We needed evidence. And I had a feeling Marjorie's tidy life had more to hide than she ever let on. The spare key was still tucked under the garden gnome, ridiculously obvious, like she never imagined anyone would have reason to break her trust. I opened the door, and the familiar scent of lavender and old wood drifted out, clinging to my memories in a way I resented. Everything was in its place. Cushions perfectly fluffed. Family photos arranged in precise symmetry along the fireplace. And beneath it all, that icy cleanliness that made me feel like a guest in a museum instead of a daughter-in-law in someone's home. We moved quietly, almost reverently, through the downstairs. But nothing stood out. No loose pages, no laptops on the desk. Marjorie kept her surfaces as clean as her reputation. She keeps most of her paperwork upstairs, Nathan murmured. In the sewing room. He led me down the hall, past the guest room, to the space she always called her creative corner. The door creaked open, and I immediately scanned the shelves, the drawers, the elegant antique desk by the window. I rifled through a stack of neatly labeled folders while Nathan opened drawers one by one. Then I heard it. Lena, he said, voice tight. You need to see this. I moved to where he was kneeling by the desk. In his hands was a slim folder labeled simply Policy LM. Inside were forged documents, applications, digital printouts, even what appeared to be a fake signature in my handwriting. But what caught my breath was the second sheet, a life insurance policy issued just 6 months ago in my name. I remembered Rachel's words, "People like this leave traces." She used my maiden name, I whispered. I never gave her that. Nathan's face had gone pale again. She knew all your personal info. From the wedding paperwork, the registry, even our tax stuff. She could have pulled this off easily. We kept digging. There was a USB drive taped to the bottom of the drawer. Nathan slipped it into his pocket, and we made a mental note to give it to Landry as soon as possible. But then I noticed the laptop. It was tucked behind a stack of fabric swatches on the floor beside the desk, partially hidden beneath a half-finished quilt. I opened it, heart thudding, and typed in the first password that came to mind, Isabel's birthday. It worked. Emails. Browser history. Notes. I scrolled through quickly and felt my stomach twist into knots. There were searches on arsenic, symptoms, dosages, how to hide it in food. Forums on life insurance loopholes. Even flagged emails between Marjorie and Isabel discussing me in vague but unmistakably threatening terms. Nathan leaned over my shoulder, reading in silence. His jaw tightened. She never even tried to hide it. She really thought no one would ever question her. She's been doing this for decades, I murmured. She probably never imagined anyone would see her as anything but a grieving mother or daughter. We took pictures of everything. Every screen, every document. I copied the files onto a thumb drive from the office drawer and slipped it into my purse. The entire time, my hands shook, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Then the floor creaked. I turned sharply. Isabel stood in the doorway. Her expression shifted as she took in the laptop, the files, Nathan and me standing there like burglars. But she didn't look surprised. "You weren't supposed to find any of that," she said flatly. Nathan stepped forward. "We know about the chocolates. About the policy. About all of it." She stared at him. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but something harder. "It wasn't supposed to be Nathan," she said, her voice suddenly breaking. "It was supposed to be you, Lena." Time slowed. My pulse roared in my ears. "What did you just say?" I whispered. She didn't flinch. "You don't belong in this family. You never did. We just wanted you gone." Nathan stepped between us, his voice full of disbelief. "You tried to kill my wife?" "She was ruining everything," Isabel snapped. "Mom said if we didn't act soon, we'd lose control. You were slipping away from us." The air thickened. The house no longer felt like a home, it felt like a trap. But they'd failed. And now the truth was burning through the lies, unstoppable. For a long moment, no one moved. The air in Marjorie's sewing room was so thick I could barely breathe, and all I could hear was the echo of Isabel's words, "It was supposed to be you." My hands clenched the edge of the desk, and I had to force myself not to step back, not to show her how deeply her confession rattled me. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. She wasn't here to apologize, she was here because we had found something she couldn't explain away. Nathan's shoulders squared as he stepped fully between us. "What the hell did you do, Isabel?" She didn't look away. "You were drifting, Nate. She was pulling you from everything. From us. Mom said if we waited too long, you'd marry her, start a family, and we'd never see you again, not the real you." I felt the sting before the rage. "So you poisoned a box of chocolates and hoped I'd die?" Isabel's lips twitched. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. Just a scare. A sickness. Something that would make you go away. We didn't think he'd be the one to eat them all." "You didn't think," Nathan snapped. "You risked my life. For what? Control? Tradition? You're our family," she said, almost pleading. "You don't understand what she's done. She made you choose. It was always her or us." My chest burned. I never asked him to choose. I wanted to be part of this family. But you and your mother made that impossible. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a split second, her face softened. "You were never supposed to stay. We thought you were just a phase. Nathan made a choke sound and turned away, pressing his palms into his forehead like he was trying to force the thoughts out. I wanted to reach for him, but I couldn't take my eyes off Isabel. Her posture had shifted now, her arms crossed tight over her chest like she was defending herself against something she had long expected. "Do you even feel remorse?" I asked quietly. "Do you understand what you almost did?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. And that hesitation, that flicker of uncertainty, told me more than anything she could have said. She didn't feel sorry. She felt exposed. Nathan finally turned back to her, his voice low and hollow. "You could have killed me. You could have killed Lena. Do you get that? This wasn't just some scheme. This was attempted murder." Isabel flinched but didn't answer. "You're sick," he said, and his voice cracked. "And I don't want to hear from you again. Ever." A silence fell like glass shattering. Isabel's jaw trembled. "You'd really cut me out over her?" Nathan looked at her like he didn't even recognize who she was. "I'm cutting you out because I see you for what you are now. You and Mom, you never cared about me. You cared about keeping me in your orbit. Like a trophy. Like a puppet. You're being dramatic." "No. I'm finally being honest." I felt something inside me break free then, something that had been coiled tight since the moment I married into this family. For years I had bent myself into someone acceptable. Someone agreeable. But not anymore. "You underestimated me, Isabel," I said quietly. "You thought I'd leave, fall apart, vanish. But I'm still here. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." Her face twisted, just for a moment, and then she stepped back. "You won't be able to prove everything." I gave her a cold smile. "We don't need to. We already have enough." She left without another word. The front door slammed seconds later, the sound reverberating through the house like a final crack in the Weller facade. Nathan sat down heavily on the edge of Marjorie's neatly made bed. He looked like someone who'd just lost everything. Maybe he had. I walked to him and placed a hand on his back. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He looked up, eyes red. "Don't be. You tried. Harder than anyone should have." "She told the truth," I said. "Whether she meant to or not." He nodded. "And I believed them over you for so long." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because the silence between us was finally honest. We gathered the laptop, the documents, and the USB drive and left the house behind. Nathan didn't look back. Neither did I. Some places aren't meant to be homes. They're crime scenes that just haven't been marked yet. Later that night, Detective Landry took our statements again, this time with the digital files and printed policies in hand. He didn't seem surprised when we told him what Isabel had said. "She cracked quicker than I thought," he said. "They usually do when they realize their alibi has holes." "Do you think she'll confess everything?" I asked. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We've got enough to charge them both." Her words were just icing on the cake. I nodded, then reached for Nathan's hand. He squeezed back. There was still a long road ahead, lawyers, courtrooms, headlines, but in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. Power. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just the quiet satisfaction of standing in the wreckage and knowing I hadn't let it destroy me. Courtrooms don't look the way they do on television. They're colder, quieter, more suffocating than dramatic. Everything smells faintly of old wood and filtered air. The walls don't echo with passionate speeches, but with the dull hum of bureaucracy. Still, when I stepped inside that courtroom for the first day of Marjorie's trial, it felt like walking into a battlefield. Not because I feared losing, but because I knew I was finally standing in the place where truth had to matter more than reputation. Nathan sat beside me, his posture tense, his face unreadable. We hadn't spoken much since the confrontation with Isabel. The truth had changed everything, his relationship with his family, his understanding of his past. It had left a crater in his chest that couldn't be filled by simple forgiveness. Still, he was here. And that meant something. Marjorie entered with her lawyer, wearing a slate-gray suit and the same expression she always wore when forced to interact with the world, dignified disapproval. She didn't look at me once. Not when I took my seat, not when the charges were read, not when the prosecuting attorney recited the list of evidence. the arsenic-laced chocolates, the forged insurance documents, the laptop full of damning searches. Isabel wasn't seated beside her. She sat alone on the far end of the courtroom, her face pale, her shoulders rigid. The judge had ruled to try them separately, Marjorie for attempted murder and conspiracy, Isabel for accessory to the crime. It was clear that whatever bond they once shared had fractured under the weight of exposure. And yet, I couldn't find satisfaction in that. I didn't want them to turn on each other. I wanted them both to face what they had done. Fully, honestly, completely. I took the stand on the second day. My hands trembled as I raised them for the oath, but when I sat down and began speaking, a strange calmness took over. I spoke plainly. I described my marriage, the years of quiet hostility, the lavish gift that made no sense, the way Nathan had eaten every piece. I recounted waking to the sound of him vomiting, the ride to the hospital, the panic that hadn't let go of my throat since. I told them what Isabel confessed, how the chocolates were never meant for Nathan, how they were meant for me. The courtroom was silent. The jury watched me with steady eyes. I wasn't sure what they were thinking, but I knew they were listening. That was all I could ask for. The prosecution presented the toxicology results, the fingerprint analysis on the chocolate box, the chain of custody for the evidence Isabel claimed to have thrown away. They played a recording, audio from Marjorie's interview with Detective Landry where, for the first time, she faltered. "I just wanted to protect my family," she had said, her voice low. Lena was tearing everything apart. I thought, if she got sick, maybe Nathan would see. It wasn't a confession in the legal sense, but it was enough. When the verdict came in, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty on all counts. Marjorie Weller was sentenced to 5 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy. Isabel, in her own hearing, received a 3-year suspended sentence with mandated psychiatric evaluation and community service. She cried when the judge delivered it. Not for me. Not for Nathan. For herself. Afterward, the reporters came. Nathan and I declined interviews. Rachel handled statements on our behalf. It wasn't about attention for us, it was about closure. And even that word felt too clean, too clinical. This wasn't closure. This was surviving something that should have ended us both. Outside the courthouse, I turned to Nathan. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. He just watched his mother being led into the transport van, her hands cuffed, her back still straight like pride was the only thing she had left. "I don't know," he said eventually. "But I'm better than I was." I nodded. We did the right thing. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and the weight in his eyes softened. "You saved my life, Lena." I didn't correct him. I didn't say that he'd saved mine too. Not just from poison, but from silence. From making myself small to keep peace that never truly existed. From living a life molded by someone else's expectations. Later that night, I sat at our dining table, flipping through a binder I'd started weeks ago, our next steps. Moving. Rebuilding. Starting fresh in a place where the Weller name didn't precede us. Nathan came up behind me and rested his hands on my shoulders. "I found a house in Willow Creek," he said quietly. "Small town. Quiet. Near the woods. You'll love the light in the mornings." I leaned back into him, heart swelling. "Yeah?" He kissed the top of my head. "Yeah. We don't have to run, Lena. But I think we deserve somewhere new to grow." And for the first time in a long time, I agreed. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of our new home, casting golden lines across the wooden floor of the living room. The air smelled like lavender and fresh paint. It was quiet in the best way, not the heavy, loaded silence I had grown used to, but the kind that felt like a breath finally released. Willow Creek wasn't Edenport. There were no marble-floored family homes looming over us, no forced brunches or brittle smiles pretending to mean well. This was a place where we could build something real. Something untainted. I walked through the kitchen barefoot, fingers trailing along the marble counter that still smelled faintly of lemon polish. Nathan had insisted on setting it all up before we even arrived. "I want it to feel like a home the second you walk in," he'd said. And it did. Every corner of this space felt like a fresh start. Light. Honest. quiet in the ways that matter. Nathan was in the backyard now, trying to figure out how to assemble the new patio furniture we'd picked out together. I watched him through the glass door, the way his hair fell over his brow, the determined crease in his forehead as he puzzled over a set of screws. He still looked tired sometimes, worn around the edges from all we'd been through, but there was a softness to him now too. A gentleness that had returned once the shadows were behind us. I touched my stomach, smiling to myself. It wasn't showing yet, but I could feel the change inside me. The shift. I hadn't told Nathan yet. I was still holding the news like a quiet secret when I wanted to release at the right moment, when the piece we'd worked so hard to reach could finally be real enough to hold joy again. He came in, wiping his hands with a towel and grinning like a kid. The chairs are definitely upside down, but they're stable. I laughed. We'll call it modern design. He kissed me, slow and warm. I was thinking, maybe tonight we make that seafood pasta you love. Celebrate the first week here. Perfect, I said, and meant it. We ate dinner out on the deck, surrounded by fireflies and the chirp of distant crickets. I could almost forget the courtroom. The poison. The years of manipulation wrapped in ribbon. Almost. But it didn't weigh me down the way it used to. The fear had been replaced by understanding. I'd faced it. I'd lived through it. And now I got to shape the life that came after. After dinner, Nathan leaned back in his chair, sipping wine. Do you ever think about them? I knew who he meant. Sometimes. Not with hate, though. More like, as a reminder. He nodded. I don't know if I'll ever forgive them. You don't have to, I said. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. It's just one path. And not the only one. He looked at me like I'd just taken something heavy off his chest. I'm trying to let go. Of the guilt. Of the blind spots. You loved them, I said gently. That's not a fault. That's human. He reached across the table, took my hand. I love you more. It was simple. And it was everything. Later, inside, I lit a candle in the hallway, something floral and warm, and pulled the small envelope from the drawer. I walked into the living room where he was placing a record on the player, something old and mellow, and held it out to him. What's this? He asked, brow lifting. I smiled. Just open it. He tore the seal and unfolded the paper inside. For a moment, he didn't speak. Just stared at the sonogram photo and the handwritten note, coming this spring. His eyes lifted to mine, wide and shining. Lena, are you serious? I nodded, barely keeping the tears in. We're going to have a baby. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly it knocked the air from my lungs. But I didn't mind. That embrace was safety. It was the future. We're going to be okay, he whispered. We're going to give them everything we didn't have. And nothing they don't need, I whispered back. As we swayed gently to the music, I let the weight of everything we'd survived drift into the background. Marjorie. Isabel. The poison. The courtroom. It would never fully disappear, but it no longer ruled our days. We'd taken back the narrative. We were starting over. On our terms. And this time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder.